Hey, it's Wombs of Review. Left that a bit late. And we have tonight's guest, we have Jo Phoenix. Excuse me. You are a chair of criminology at Open University and convener of the Gender Critical Research Network at the OU. And you're a professor of criminology. That's right? Yes.
That is all correct.
What a terrible opening. And we have Natasha Chart, female rights campaigner and author of a new book, author of Practical Politics for Bold Women. Okay, thank you for coming on. That was a terrible intro. Okay, so sorry. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Please, Jo, we'll start with you. Okay, please tell us how you got cancelled and what you're doing about it.
Well, there's a story, and I'm going to take us back. I might be a little bit boring, so as soon as I turn into an academic and you guys are like, oh, just kind of say something, and I'll kind of jump off my own treadmill and become a little bit more lively. We are nearly 2 years to the day. On December the 5th, it will be the 2nd year anniversary from the point that I got told I was blacklisted from the University of Essex on the grounds of being a transphobe, apparently. Right now, I don't know how many of your listeners or how much you guys know about what happened, but it was, am I allowed to use swear words? Yeah, it was a shit show. Right? It was a shit show of a day for me. So I was saying earlier, I count myself just as, your mild-mannered academic. I've spent 24 years doing research. Most of the research that I do has been around sexual violence against women. It's been around sex work and prostitution, child sexual exploitation. And I've done a lot of stuff on youth justice because, if we're talking about justice systems, we need to remember the children involved as well, because they get pretty shafted by the justice system too. So about 3 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, I got contacted by someone I know from Canada and said, hey, I've got this huge data set on trainee prison officers. And part of what they're talking about is dealing with trans prisoners, right? We think you might be interested in this data set. So I went over, I had a look, and sure enough, I was, because what the prison officer trainees were talking about was everything that we now know. It's already out there in the public domain about the challenges of keeping everybody safe. So the challenges of having trans men in a male estate, trans women in a female estate, just all of those complexities. They were talking about them just in ordinary interviews. So I went over, did a bit of data analysis, did a presentation on trans rights in prisons. The presentation basically said, it's complicated. It's just complicated. And I was due to give that presentation on December the 5th at Essex University. I had been invited to give, that talk. And on the morning of the talk, I got told that there was some Twitter activity going on. It always starts with Twitter, doesn't it? That there was some Twitter activity going on, that, quote unquote, a well-known member of an anti-trans lobby group was about to give a talk. And one particular member of Essex University's staff basically did a long tweet thread saying, bat signal up, go ask her hard questions, which of course, hard questions. Yeah, that's my stock and trade. I'm an academic. I like hard questions and I like really complicated answers. But in this case, what happened was within a couple of hours, the students and the staff started protesting. In the end, they were threatening to barricade. I never found out if it was the university itself or just the room that I was due to give my talk in. The university made the choice, rightly, I think, to cancel that day, right? And put it off until they could get appropriate security in place for me to be able to give my talk, for attenders to come and listen, and for it to all happen, peacefully and respectfully. Anyway, a week later, the department that invited me had a deputation of students who put to them that they would feel tremendously unsafe if I appeared. You can see a bit of me, right? I'm 5'2". I'm 57 years old. I have 2 replaced shoulders, 2 replaced knees, and a titanium rod for a spine. Right? I'm not going to do anyone any damage. Right? The worst thing I'm going to do is probably ask you a tough question. That's it. But the students came. I found out later, we all found out later through the Reindorf review, thank you, Aqua Reindorf, that the staff trawled through my Twitter feed, trawled through my Facebook feed to find evidence of my political crimes of transphobia. And then they voted to blacklist me permanently. Well, that was 2 years ago. That was the day my job changed forever. And I knew at the time, I knew that this was going to be a life changer. And I kept telling people at the time, no, you don't understand. This doesn't happen in universities. It really doesn't. That this has happened is a huge problem. And, even my dear partner, I adore her. We've been together for a very long time. But even she would be saying to me, like, can't you just settle down a little bit? I have a history of being a little bolshy, just a tad. Anyway, so I trusted the process. So for your listeners or your viewers, and for you guys, if you've not been to universities are really weird places. They're unlike every other organization that you could possibly imagine. It's a flat hierarchy. And the only way you can get things done in a university, because people like me, the academics, have this amazing contract that says we can say no. We can just no. The only way you can get things done is to trust the process. So you have processes for everything. Anyway, I trusted the process that the Vice Chancellor, Anthony Forster, initiated, which was a review of the cancellation and blacklisting of me and the near cancellation of Professor Rosa.
Is that the Reindorf report, yes?
Yeah, the Reindorf report reported on the events. Yeah. So he initiated that, more power to him. That was a good move to do that. And, I trusted, sorry, my chair moves around a lot. I trusted. I didn't say anything. I acted the good professional. I carried the burden of it. And I just hoped and hoped and hoped that the Reindorf review would come out correct, right? And exonerate me from this stink of transphobia that was beginning to engulf me. Of course, it had huge ramifications at the OU with, across the OU and with my reputation at the OU, because as most of your listeners and you guys will know, if you get accused of transphobia and you argue against it, that's proof of your transphobia. I mean, it's just, one of these bizarre logics that you can never get out from under. So thus we move forward in time to May of this year. And May of this year was another game changer in my life. My mother had just died, which was sad. And I had just had that titanium rod shoved in my spine to keep my spine stable, which was painful. And whilst recovering from both of those things, the University of Essex published the Reindorf report and their public apology to me, right? And to Rosa. And of course, at the time, I was like, hurrah, I have been vindicated. Rosa's been vindicated. Hurrah, hurrah. I didn't expect the media storm. I said, I'm just a mild-mannered academic. If like two people read something I write, I sit there and drink a bottle of wine in celebration. I'm not used to courting the public, whatever that might be. So they apologized. That was great. Got sucked up into a media storm. I couldn't deal with it. When I say I couldn't deal with it, I didn't know how to deal with it. I could barely even tweet right at that point. Just like this. But, and then, of course, the Maya Forstater ruling came literally weeks after the Reindorf review. And what I knew at that point was that there was a political opening. I've always been a bit of a chess player. And one of the things that I know is if you have an employment contract, you can do everything your contract allows you to do. Yeah, everything. And that contract allows me to form research networks. And the Meyer Forstater ruling allowed me to get together with the colleagues that I already knew about in the OU who shared similar views to me to form a research network. And I knew that in reforming that research network, there was not a damn thing the university could do about it without being discriminatory, right? Now, that wasn't a cynical move on my part. It was because I'd spent 2 years having to be quiet about my own views. And, you know, I don't know, you guys have met me for what, 13 minutes. I have a lot to say about things, you know, and 2 years of pent upness just went like that. Well, the shit hit the fan after that, didn't it? Because what then happened was approximately 382 members of the Open University signed an open Google Docs letter accusing the Open University Gender Critical Research Network, myself, I mean, they didn't use my name, but they might as well have, of being transphobic, of all manner of things. And they called for the university to shut our network down. At the same time, there were 3 open letters, or was it 2? Two open letters or a statement that was placed on university servers, right? That's very different than an open letter on Google Docs, because if it's on a university server, that's the university speaking, right? My employer speaking. And one of those open letters accuses members of the OU GCRN and the network itself of contributing to, quite literally, the murder of trans people in America. Right? So just hyperbolic in its claims, but again, calling for us to be disbanded. Right, one tiny bit of technical stuff, and then I'll begin to tell a more happy tale. If you ask an academic research network to be disbanded on the grounds of any particular political view, what you're doing is breaching the laws on academic freedom. We know this. Thank you, Aqua Reindorf. Right? So we know that. But if you ask them to shut down on the basis of stereotyped views about gender critical people, then you are directly calling for those academics to be discriminated against. Directly. There's no indirect here. It's a direct call to discriminate, to treat differently, to immiserate, to stop me doing my research and make my working conditions worse than other people, right? So by the time 380 of my colleagues at the Open University were calling for that to happen, I kind of don't think I had a breakdown. It wasn't a breakdown. I was pretty much deep in PTSD at this point because I was actually getting attacked from all sides. Do you know what I mean? It was like there was the whole Essex stuff, because around that time, Anthony Forster, who had apologized, then apologized to the trans and non-binary community at Essex for apologizing to Rosa and I during Pride Month. You know, all I'm going to say, it was my month too.
I heard this. This is what I read, Joe, that they apologized and then retracted that apology. How did
they didn't technically
make you feel?
Yeah, they didn't technically retract it. They just apologized for apologizing. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, okay. Yeah. And by that time too, I found out that they were never going to investigate who had produced that violent poster, you know, the "Shut the Fuck Up Turf" poster that had a picture of a gun. I mean, the classic meme, you know, the "Shut the Fuck Up," and a list of all of my supposed transphobic crimes on another side. That made its way around the campus. Nobody ever investigated that. And the university said to me, well, we can't. That student might be gone, so there's no point. In addition to that, the Reindorf report said, you really need to re-invite Joe. You know, that's part of what you need to do. So they did. But they gave me 2 weeks notice. Remember, I was lying in bed having a titanium rod shoved up my back. They gave me 2 weeks notice, and they offered me an online seminar closed to only Essex email, you know, people, and outside of term time. And I was like, well, hang on a second. No. You gave me the prime spot, the Christmas lecture, before, and it was open to all comers, including the public. So I declined that, and the next 3 invitations that came. And then I told them that they don't get to have the pearls of my wisdom. I refuse to go down there now. So yeah, we get to somewhere around the summer, and that's when I realized that actually my chess playing skills needed to come back in, because there's only two things to do. And I'm sorry I have an American accent when I say this, because it's going to sound really, really ridiculous. But when your back is against the wall, there's only one thing left to do, and that's fucking fight. I mean, literally. Do you know what I mean? Because these people had taken my name, my career, 2 years of my life. I trusted in the system. The system let me down. And so then it was like, okay, fine. That's all the things telling me it's time to stand up. And thankfully Maya had stood up before me. Kathleen had stood up before me. Helen Joyce had stood up before me. All of these people had stood up, and it enabled me to stand up. Can I take a break from talking for a little bit?
No, that's fine. Yeah, sorry, Joe. So what you were going through is very similar to Professor Stock, to Kathleen Stock, with the posters and that poor woman. She looked haunted. I've seen the interviews of her, and she looked absolutely haunted. And you've gone through exactly the same. And Joe, you're not as as well known, I don't think, as Kathleen Stock, but it's exactly the same as happening to you and other women. And so what you're doing is so important. And look, I don't go to university. I've never been, but my daughters might want to better themselves, and they've got to have a good environment to be, to go to university and have lecturers that are, not hounded for a start. That would be great. Not hounded out of the campus with posters everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, that didn't happen at the OU, right? That was just at Essex. And, I would say it's really similar to what happened to Kathleen, but also very, very different. Kathleen's was absolutely targeted. Do you know what I mean? That was with laser-like precision. And it was well thought out. And in Kathleen's case, it was like, I've had a lot of what she's had, but Kathleen's is ramped up on steroids. So
it doesn't equal out, like cancel out what's happened to you, Joe, at all. No. To have your own colleagues as well, condemn you. Did you have a lot of support from other professors at all privately?
No.
None? Oh God, this is so depressing. I'm getting depressed.
No.
Well, Natasha, you've wrote a book, and it is called, I'm going to say it again, the Practical Politics for Bold Women, and I have read it and I love it. Your book is amazing. It's a little it's a DIY female rights activist DIY book, and I love it. It's so positive. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. Glad you like it, and thanks for having me on.
I do love it.
I didn't, there have been so many women coming out and sharing their stories, who are wonderful storytellers like Joe. And people are starting to hear more about what's happening. There are more people speaking out, but there's not the particular way that women have been being canceled for several years in this space means that, unlike most movements and causes, there's not much professionalism to it. There's not much institutionalization to it, which, that's not for everybody. But the gender activists made this happen not just by forking over cash to some particular number of people. It wasn't like that. Politics isn't like a vending machine or something, even though it, sometimes you might like to think oh, well, if you could come up with enough money, you could do anything. It doesn't work like that. They built these really big, sophisticated influence networks and lobbying machines. And, they went through, and if you had told the vast majority of people 10, 20 years ago, that it would be possible for a pretty small group of men to get together with, admittedly, a few, wealthy backers and whatnot, and convince the leaders of the world's most powerful nations and its most prestigious institutions and all of these media companies to not only be willing to say but to feel righteous and morally honor bound to say that men could be women if they wanted to be in public and put the force of law behind this. You would not have believed that it could happen. I would not have believed that it could happen. But it did happen, and it happened because they got really organized. They built institutions, they built networks, they did public education and outreach. They got their followers educated on, like, here's how you reach out to your elected officials, here's how you reach out to people at corporations. You know, they did all of these like influence building and networking activities. They, you know, went out and started different charities and nonprofits and political action committees and all kinds of different things. They talked to everybody. They talked to the liberals and the progressives and the conservatives and the socialists and the libertarians, everyone they lobbied. When the gender activists go to Capitol Hill in the US, honestly, it would not be surprising if like it ends up being some kind of transgender remembrance day for like half the year if this trend goes on. Like there won't be any point at which it would be permissible to disagree with them because it's like going to always be a remembrance day. It's an interesting technique, but they give one of those flags to everybody on Capitol Hill. Everybody. All of the congressional offices, all of the Senate offices. When, you know, someone is trying to pass a law protecting the rights of women and girls to single-sex sports, or trying to protect children from sterilization for psychological conditions, you know, that's usually in conservative states. They talk to everybody. They talk to the conservative legislators who are proposing or supporting those laws. They talk to the conservative governors who are considering signing them. And the reason that they can do this is because they got really serious about, again, institutionalizing their cause, creating stable, you know, vehicles of engagement. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's a repeatable process. It wasn't magic. Yeah. It's something that it's like a set of learned skills and practices that anyone can take up, that they didn't invent. You know, other people have done this before. Mm-hmm. That's really effective. And so my book is about, here are some low cost, low effort, low overhead ways to get started doing that, so that you can start building stable foundations, so that you can start educating and organizing your people. And when I say organizing, I mean, you know, organizing is getting more than one person to work together towards a common goal. So if you've ever helped your friends, you know, you big group of friends, everybody's trying to decide, oh, where should we go for dinner tonight? You've helped them like, okay, we're going to go here at this time. We're going to have fun. Let's just sort it. That's organizing. If you've ever gotten a little kid to go to bed without like some kind of big fight, that's organizing. You know how to get another person working with you together towards a common goal. So that is what, like, if people really want to fight this, that's the thing that needs to be done in response. And it needs to be done in large scale. Like in the US, you know, they've got the ACLU on their side. Well, it's not just the ACLU. The ACLU has 50 state chapters and a chapter in Puerto Rico. And that doesn't count all of the other state organizations. You know, every time we testified in favor of one of those girls and women's sports bills in the states, there were always at least half a dozen different state level charities or nonprofits of different types testifying against those bills, talking about the terrible harm, and a lot of them not related. Like they would be sports associations, they would be churches, sometimes it would be an ACLU chapter or some other, you know, group that like you'd know the national chapter of, but they didn't send that, they sent the local. You know, they'd get like some local head of a university or head of university admissions to testify. They would bring in the head of the Chamber of Commerce not the National Chamber of Commerce, but the state and local Chamber of Commerce. And so if you start to think about what you need to do in order to counter that kind of organization, which is at the local, the county, the state, the national level, it's big, but it's doable in particular because it means they're like someone who can only do like, oh, I can only do like a little local group and there's only 3 of us. You can make a big impact. Mm-hmm. If you can start building a network and bringing people in to testify in state legislatures when bills come up, and then for other countries, you would have, of course, different structures and different levels of government, but it's kind of the same thing.
Absolutely. So, I found your book really universal. Actually, I learned a lot about American politics. 500,000, you have 500,000 politicians to get through. I'm like, oh my God, I think we've got 630 in our parliament and then a couple of 100 lords. So it blew my mind. But do you know what? Your book, it was like the cool cousin has come to stay over. It was just like lots of be positive. Yeah. Be positive. Don't fall out with anyone. I loved that, you were, my favourite bit actually was the left, when the left come out of these things that put off normal people like us, like don't mention Stalinism, don't mention Maoism. I love this woman so much because you have spoken to normal women that are not part of these far left activism, but you are saying, but also let's get on. Like, don't be horrified that the woman over there has read the Daily Mail. Don't be like you're terrified that she read I love your wording. And I love that it was just so positive as well, and that you can do it. To start a women's group and you can do it. Really positive. Loved it so much. It was perfect.
Well,
where can you get the book from, by the way, Natasha?
You can go to my website, natashachart.com, and you can get it there. But unfortunately, there's no international shipping. It's not on Kindle because Amazon put it up and then it got taken down. But I think it's on some other electronic book distribution services. So you should look at other ebook services to see if you can get it elsewhere. I think the website, it's like a self-publishing website. It said it was like $40 or something to ship it internationally. So it just, everything's messed up right now.
Like what you were just saying, you go through, every way that you could maybe do a bit if you're in business or start a business. I just loved that it was just very practical and just really felt like good common sense and trying to get, I think you maybe you about the trashing and that happens in the movement, and you're just like let's stop that. Let's bang some heads together because we've got work to do, because especially in America where it's just so vast, and the work that you have to do over there. So I just really love the message. It's like, please get on. Just really lovely. But it's really positive book. Really positive, actually. Like, we can do it.
We could though.
Absolutely. Jo, you got anything to say?
I've got a question, actually.
Sure.
Is it all right if I ask, Natasha? So you said that these activists have been really organised and they've done things like give their flags out at political meets and things like that. Do you think that's been a proper concerted effort to be organised, or do you think that's happened naturally?
I mean, in anything like this, there's going to emerge a lot of synergies and things that so for instance, this got popular on Tumblr and other social media sites that not too many years ago, those sites weren't really around and they weren't such a force. But when, by the time this started hitting where they'd gotten good institutional capture and investment, there were also all these teenagers who'd been raised on Tumblr who are now starting to be young adults, and they're just out in force, and they're very social media savvy, and they're very convinced that they know everything about human life and society and history from their readings on Tumblr, which have been very extensive. And, aren't they just the experts, and you have to do what we say now? And we can whip up a Twitter cancel mob and ruin your whole career. So you better listen. And I think,
No. Please carry on. I want to just come in off the back of what you say, but please finish what you're saying.
Sure. I think that there are probably a lot of politicians who are in DC, who are in Democratic Party politics, where it's probably been at least 5 years, but probably more than that, since they've talked to any staffer, all of these people heavily exposed to social media, who does not affirm that human sex change is possible. It's probably been that long since they even seriously talked to anyone that they thought of as being on their side or part of their networks who does not believe this. They're in this bubble that they've created for themselves.
I think, if you don't mind me coming in,
Oh, sure.
Natasha, for a second. I call myself a criminologist. I'm actually a sociologist by trade. And one of the things that I study is complex organizations that are desperately trying to do the right thing, but end up doing things kind of paradoxically, or it ends up having paradoxical effects, if you like. And to me, one of the things that's happened is that we're sitting at a really unique moment in history, right? Never before in the course of human history have we been able to access the sort of science that we can access to modify our bodies, right? Now, I'm going to say I'm a beneficiary of that, right? I keep banging on about all my replaced bits, my titanium, my ceramic, and stuff like that. And thank goodness we can modify bodies, right? Because it means that I can walk and, I'm not in a wheelchair and in pain the entire time. So hurrah for medical science, yeah? But of course, that force, it can go anywhere, can't it? And we've seen it be able to go anywhere now with being able to offer, puberty blockers and stuff like that. So we as a species have never encountered this combination of science on our bodies, if you like. And of course, it also comes at a time, and it comes as no surprise to me, off the back of second wave feminism, which I was, keenly part of, when we try and argue against the constraints of gender, right? The constraints of stereotyping about what it means to have a particular sex. And it also comes off the back of, all of the, for lack of better words, gay and lesbian liberation stuff. So, none of us want to be saying to somebody, no, you can't be your authentic self. What we want to say is, yes, you can be your authentic self. Come out, it'll be fine. You've got buddies out here. And I think that force, what I never expected was to see the label transgender or trans, whichever the words that we want to use, to encompass so much human experience. Because that's one of the things that's been so successful about some of the campaigning and the organizing over the last 5 years, is that the notion of trans has become so broad as to encompass everything and anything. Now, I'd stand here and I will always say, I will support people's rights to be whoever they want to be. If they want to be a giraffe, rock on with your bad self. I'll call you a giraffe, right? Because that's part of human dignity and respect. But don't expect me as an employer to raise the ceiling in your office to accommodate a giraffeness, right? So how we respond as complex organizations to people's claims for identity is where the real nub of what's happened gets felt, at least for me, at any rate. And, and I think there are some real complexities here, because I'm sure we can all think in our own lives of people who we know who are transgender and who genuinely and generally actually need support. Because I certainly know quite a few, I mean, not personally, but I have known in my time quite a few very conservative individuals who would like to see, anyone of any kind of sexual or gender diversity pushed to the sidelines and just got rid of, so that we can reinstitute more traditional families, more traditional ways of living, blah, 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 all of that. Now, I find myself, and I don't know about the rest of the panel or indeed, your viewers, I find myself in this really strange place where you have to do a both and all the time, or a neither nor. So it's like, I support transgender people to assert their own capacity to be themselves. But where it butts up against rights that have been very hard fought for, then we need to be careful, right? And of course, we know that those single-sex spaces exist. They don't exist simply because, women are weak and need help. They exist because we know the realities of male violence, right? That's why they exist. And I've just talked myself into some strange place. And I'm sorry, I've kind of interrupted you.
No, that's fine. That was very interesting. You reminded me, though. I'm gonna forget the name of the book, but there's like a classic sexology text from, I think, well over 100 years ago. That, when you're talking about, like, say, very conservative attitudes, by which, correct me, but like I think you're meaning, like, much older attitudes that were negative, and that gets kind of used interchangeably. I mean, here in the US, the only people in mainstream politics that I can even find consistently who will get mad about the sterilization of lesbian and gay youth and say that it's a travesty that ought not to be happening are the people who are called conservatives. Whereas the gender ideology harks back to that sort of like founding sexology idea that that LGBT people are inverts. And where they're described in terms that sound exactly like talking about having a gender identity. And all of those early sexologists were eugenicists and thought that they ought to be sterilized, thought that they ought not to be allowed to reproduce. And that is an attitude that's like in the founding of sexology as a discipline that I think was never aired out and examined. And it's, I guess, conservative in terms of being really old, but like modern conservatives generally don't embrace it, but that like it's fine and it's not considered reprehensible that people who call themselves progressive and call themselves like big human rights defenders are embracing this like century-old call for all the LGB kids to be sterilized, which is just bats.
Kraft Ebbing is the name you're looking for. Kraft Ebbing, surname Richard von Kraft Ebbing. Now he has it was a book called Deviant Sexual Behavior, I believe, but he has a particular place in British cultural politics and lesbian histories, in fact, from the 1920s. Anyone remember Radcliffe Hall, The Well of Loneliness? So Radcliffe Hall wrote a book, right? Here's a bit of lesbian history for you. Radcliffe Hall wrote a book called The Well of Loneliness. You can tell exactly what the tone of that book was by its title. And it's basically a woman who's a lesbian who comes out halfway through the book. She finds a girlfriend. They have, a kind of passionate exchange of words one evening. And at the end of the chapter, it says, and that night they were not parted, right? That's all it says. That's it. That book got taken to court, and Radcliffe Hall herself got taken to court. And the book was going to be trashed as being an obscene publication, right? So the only way that Radcliffe Hall and a few other of the literary people around the Bloomsbury group could defend that book and say, no, this is not obscene, was to actually bring Kraft Ebbing's book into court and say, no, look, there are lesbians and gay men. They're called the third sex. They are inverts. Right. So that was actually used, Kraft Ebbing was used at that point to try and argue in a liberatory way and an emancipatory way for, a lesbian book to basically continue to be published. So, I can't remember the outcome of it. All I can tell you is I bought my copy of that book in like 1983, something like that. So it wasn't banned as an obscene publication ultimately. So, and really the kind of bottom line to that is, no matter what idea that you have at a time and no matter how regressive it might be, it can always be rehashed for progressive means. But the opposite is also true. Progressive ideas can be rehashed for very regressive ends. And that's where I think that we sit at the moment, is that many of our ideas, many of us second waivers ideas about, the social construction of gender, which was, the lifeblood of feminism in the 1980s, are now being used in a way that nobody could have possibly predicted. And that's to kind of erase, for lack of better words, the immutability of sex. We in the 80s, we separated sex from gender for very particular reasons, and that was to try and say that just because we have, a vagina doesn't mean we shouldn't be able to open a bank account, for fuck's sake. Which, you had to, literally, you had to have your husband's signature in the UK to open a bank account until 1972. Right? That may seem a long time ago to all of you because you're probably really young, but I was alive at that point.
I'm not that young. I was born in 87. I don't remember. I was a baby. But
Yeah.
fuck that. Fuck asking your husband to get a bank account. Sod that off.
Yeah. Well, rape in marriage wasn't made illegal in this country till 1992.
Yeah, that's mental as well. Mental.
It was about the same. It was a similar time frame that the last U.S. state put that into law, sometime in the early 90s, I think.
Yeah.
So, but the author I was trying to remember, Havelock Ellis, volume 2 of his History of Sexology, sexual inversions. But here's the thing: like, you go back and look at the writings back then, they were all like that, and there were a lot of them. And they talked about all these things. It wasn't like some kind of surprise, like they didn't know about people who like to cross-dress or people who had same-sex attraction, but they were considered the progressives at the time.
Did
all of the people who considered...
Sorry, did they think they were being clever, saying it as a third sex or whatever? Did they think this was the clever, the better way to talk about people that were on the outside of society?
Well, I think they didn't.
Sorry, Natasha, you go.
I'm sorry, they didn't say it was a third sex. They described it as sexual inversion. They would it would be like saying that someone was like a man on the inside and a woman on the outside, or a woman on the inside and a man on the outside, and that's how they described gay men and lesbians. Which sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, sounds like a chestnut. That.
Yeah, they did. It's certainly in the trial of The Well of Loneliness, they referred to the third sex. And that became in the 1920s a way of talking about lesbians and gay men. But here's and sorry, I'm banging on. You guys have accidentally got me onto a specialist subject.
We love you. Yeah. We absolutely love you. It's so interesting. No, this is amazing. A little bit of history, a little bit of feminist history. I love it.
I'm AKA all over the fucking shop. But no, the thing that I was going to say is, if this is going to sound like it's nothing to do with the subject that we're all talking about, but just bear with me for a second. If you say to somebody who commits crime, for instance, you've committed, or if you have a court accept the fact that somebody commits a crime because they have some sort of biological abnormality, right? What it does is it enables that court to operate a certain degree of leniency about punishment. Because if you've committed a crime because of some biological problem, say, massive vitamin D deficiency, suddenly made you go and commit a crime, then of course what the court's going to do is, okay, you couldn't help it, right? You're less culpable. So we're going to be, kind of nice to you and actually just give you vitamin D, right? Now, in some senses, back at that point, when, most lesbian and, certainly gay sex in this country was absolutely outlawed, and in America, it was outlawed. Lesbian sex was never outlawed in this country. I think they say, don't they, that the reason lesbian sex was never outlawed was because Queen Victoria couldn't possibly imagine that women would do anything with each other, right? So it was never outlawed. Anyway, the point here is to then claim that people are biologically an invert or biologically a third sex, or whatever category you want to use. It's actually, at that moment in history, tremendously progressive. Tremendously. Because it enables courts to say, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't send you to prison if it's all because it's driven by your biology. Maybe we should actually let you live.
Yeah, that's a bit like in the old days when women committed like serious crimes and then they went to court and they weren't given such a harsh sentence, or they wouldn't be sentenced to death at least because we're the fairer sex, so we're not capable of evil.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
all bullshit. And that would
Yeah.
have been pretty progressive at the time as well.
Would have been, you know. I mean, none of us want to argue for a position where we actively do harm to others, do we?
Of course not.
You know, I do know of a case in Britain, this is way off subject. I do know of a case in Britain where a sow, a female pig, was going to be killed because I think she'd bitten somebody, something like that. It was back in the late 1800s. So they were going to send her off to the knacker's yard. But because she was pregnant, they gave her a stay of execution.
Yeah, we used to try and potentially execute animals for crimes because we thought that they knew right from wrong in some sense and were capable of distinguishing that there's something wrong with it. Believable.
Yeah.
I only know little bits and bobs. I don't know a lot of history, but I remember that because it made me laugh.
Indeed. Indeed.
There's a really good book called American Eugenics by a woman named Nancy Ordover who does not talk directly about gender identity in this book in what I thought was a very interesting way. But she did talk about, sort of this, tendency to say that it was biologically innate to be same-sex attracted, for those reasons, to like get social sympathy, to get support, to have something to argue. It's like, look, we're not just a bunch of perverts after the kids, right? Like we're just ordinary people who want to live normal lives, and we're decent. We understand consent, and, we're not trying to hurt anybody. But she did point out that that is not the only way that rights can be protected, and that it would actually be very dangerous if there was ever a biological basis for homosexuality to be discovered, because what could be the possible reason for researching that and actually finding it? Like when you're researching something like that, you're either looking to have more of it or have less of it. And no one's going to be researching it to have more of it, most likely. So, but it's not the only foundation of rights. And, she alludes to like religious rights. I mean, we don't have rights of freedom of conscience or freedom of speech because there's some kind of biologically innate thing to the people. It's like you don't protect the expression and practice of the Catholic faith because we say that like that's a genetic inborn trait. It's because we know there are bad consequences from suppressing religious beliefs, even ones that we might personally disagree with strenuously. Like the bad that comes from that is worse than any possible good. And we could protect rights of sexual identity and expression in the same way, no doubt.
I mean, this is,
Natasha,
this is.
Oh. I was going to say that you go into religion in your book and how to take from religious groups, how they're organized, how they have no money and they manage to recruit people. I found that so interesting as well. Honestly, I could just read your book again. It was such a lovely little read. But because you come from a religious background yourself, so you have knowledge. But it was just so interesting, really, really interesting, and how you've, we can take advice from the religious groups on how they work and how they would get people on board.
Conversation was the first and is still the most effective marketing tool that there ever has been.
Nicely put.
But you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say the thing that you've just raised, though, is going from those ideas about how we make sense of the world, which are, forgive the academic language here, those are basic theorizations, aren't they? And how we make sense of the world then necessarily shapes the politics that we have afterwards, because how you diagnose the problem shapes what sort of solution you're going to put in place. And I think that movement from ideas to rights is one of the really complicated ones, because there are, a dear colleague of mine would say every single human being has rights by virtue of being human, right? and we have that enshrined across all sorts of laws. How that operates in practice becomes that gap between the ideal of something and then what it means to operate in societies fundamentally structured by profound inequalities. And I think for me, the fact that we have all of the rights that we do are great. Yet on the other hand, those rights aren't going to do diddly squat about things like, I don't know, men and women's pay gap. If it was, since, we had the Equal Pay Act in this country in 1979 or 76, I can't remember which. That's nearly 50 years. And yet women's pay relative to men's last year was 72%. When that act got brought into being in the mid 70s, it was 72%. So there's been no forward progression there at all. So just having the right to equal pay does nothing. Somehow we have to address the structural inequalities that sit underneath. And that becomes much more important from my perspective.
Well, there are structural inequalities, Joe, because you're having to take the OU to court. Isn't that right? Such progression. What progression.
That is.
Right.
That is. So, kind of hashtag lawfare. So just to come back to the story a little bit, we get to well, it was about 7 weeks ago, I think I broke cover. I think 7 weeks ago. Philia conference. I announced a crowd justice funder to enable me to take the Open University to an employment tribunal, which is a court, because of their failure to protect me from the discrimination and harassment that I was experiencing. Now, I said that I would say something about, a kind of happy story. It's never happy to take your employer to court. But the happy part about all of this, well, two happy parts. Not me, the supporters of that crowd justice funder, we hit the first target in 86 minutes. 86 minutes. The first target was £15,000. The second target was £50,000. We hit that before 2 weeks had been out, right? It's now sitting at £88,500. I'm going to have to increase the target. I'm going to make an announcement later on this week or next week. I just got to figure out how to combine that with other things that are happening in my real life, because it'll be a bit of a media storm when all of that happens. But I thought long and hard about taking my beloved employer. I love the OU, but to take them through a court process meant a lot of pain for a lot of people. It meant a lot of expense. But then I thought, well, actually, if one of us, like Maya Forstater, can stand up, right, and do what she's done, the more of us who stand up, you become, I'm not saying that I have become, because I actually don't have a lot of ego, despite the number of words that I can kind of like issue out in a few minutes. If I can actually show the fact that all you have to do is know your contract law and stand up. That's all you have to do. That's all you have to do. Just stand up. Maya, in the day that I launched the Crowd Justice Funder, and I was like sitting there at the conference going, holy shit, do I really want to do this? This is going to be my life over. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm jumping off into the deep end. What if I don't make the money? Blah, 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 blah. Anxiety, anxiety, anxiety. Maya just looked at me and she said, you know what? You only have to jump off the precipice once, right? Just jump. You'll go into free fall for a little while. And then before you know it, thousands of hands will be there to catch you. Yeah. And that has been my experience, is I jumped off that precipice. God knows where I'm going to be in another year's time. I have no ability to predict my life anymore. I really don't.
Back here telling us about it. That's where you'll be. Here telling us.
I mean, I know people have been saying things like, gosh, you're brave. And I think I don't recognize myself in that. And I keep saying this because I've thought a great deal. Have I been brave? Have I been foolish? What have I done? I've dragged my partner into this, and blah, blah, blah. And I sit there and think, actually, the only reason that people like Maya or people like myself or people like Kathleen or any of us making whatever sort of resistances that we're making, the only reason we do it is actually because we have an ethical orientation towards doing the right thing, right? I mean, if you were stood by a river and a 4-year-old jumped into the river and was going to certainly drown, you would jump in, even though you might drown, because you know it's the right thing to do. You don't think about it, you just do it. And I think that kind of call to action with a practical guide of how one organizes is what we actually need. And I have been so impressed with so many people who have said, you made me a little braver today. I actually came out as gender critical at work today. I did this, and I think, fantastic. So part of the reason I'm taking the OU to court is because I'm really fucked off that I've been harassed and discriminated against, right? As number one, I have been treated unlawfully by 2 universities, not just one, and what's the American expression? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, right? Not going to have it happen again. So I'm making my stand. But the second reason is because of the symbolic value of the law, right? It tells us where the border is. It tells us where, right and wrong lie. And what we really, really need at this point is that border to be drawn between healthy debate and disagreement and harassment and discrimination. And that's really what I'm hoping the OU court case will bring about. And I hope that's a happy story rather than yet another story of yet another academic who has been hounded to the point that they cry at 2 o'clock in the morning and can't sleep.
There have to be
No, please. Go ahead.
There have to be consequences for the bullying and harassment, as there ought to have been all along, or because as they keep racking up wind, it's like, you don't like say something gender critical online and then the next morning like a picket shows up outside the front of your house. That, it doesn't work like that. But every person that they can make an example of and get pushed off a campus or pushed out of a job, it intimidates other people and it makes their work easier. And the more people who stand up and show that there are consequences and you can't just get away with that, the better it will be. And I also think a lot of times women have the attitude, oh, well, it's just me. It doesn't matter. I shouldn't be selfish. I shouldn't take the spotlight. I shouldn't do this, that, or the other. But if we really want justice for women, that has to include us personally, like us ourselves, no matter how much we have been encouraged to, try to make ourselves small through our lives. Because if it could happen to us, it could happen to any woman.
I'm just going to, yes, again, we're just going to leave it positive, but your book is the call to action, isn't it? That it is, and how to work together, and also it's also like, don't drink, if you've got, alcohol, drug abuse, it's a real self-help book as well, Natasha. Your books are really self-help. It's really positive, and it's also like, love yourself, for goodness sake, you're amazing. There is, at the beginning of the book, it's like, love yourself, because you need to in this war, because look what's happening to Joe. Birdie still gets rubbish online every day. So I'd really loved it, and I'll just the ending of Joe's little ending there and yours, really positive, that there is a positive message. We can all work together. Wombs with Review, we've been so tight, haven't we, since the beginning of the year, and we can say all sorts to each other, and we're not going to have a go at each other. We all trust each other, and we know we're not going to be like, you cannot say that. So it can work. I'm going to tell everybody out there it can work. Women grouping together and working together can work, and I'm really positive about it, and I'm just really happy that I got to speak to you two tonight. Thank you so much, and I think we're going to end it now. So until next week, everybody, thank you very much and take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is Chloe going to end?